So for those of you who missed it, my name is Ted Coe, and I'm Development Coordinator and a radio host at KCSB-FM. I know a lot of you in the room, and that's really exciting. KCSB is Santa Barbara's community radio station based here at UCSB. And our guest, Dr. Michio Akaku, is a professor of theoretical physics who teaches at the City College of New York. He will be speaking tonight to a sold-out audience about his book, The Future of the Mind. We are excited to welcome Dr. Akaku to campus for an intimate conversation with UCSB students and KCSB programmers about his extensive work in media, especially as the creator of diverse programs in the realms of community radio and AM talk radio. He hosts a weekly call-in show and has a lengthy history with the Pacifica Radio Network, with which KCSB is affiliated, and he has produced explorations for many years in affiliation with WBAI-FM in New York City. He has also served as a WBAI board member. We are grateful to UCSB A&L staff and to Professor Akaku himself for this opportunity to have a focused conversation about the power of media. There are some prepared questions I know in the room, and then we'll keep it somewhat focused on media, and then with time allowing, we can maybe open things up and get a little more abstract later before we're done at 5 o'clock today. So Marta Olvest, KCSB's advisor, will help facilitate the proceedings. And without further ado, we bring you Dr. Michio Akaku.
Let me just make some introductory remarks, and then we'll just throw it open, okay? First of all, I'm a theoretical physicist. I work to complete Einstein's theory, a theory of everything. In fact, there's even a movie called The Theory of Everything, which talks about some of the research that I do. And here at the university, we even have a string group, a very large string group, which tries to complete the dream of a theory of everything. However, I also do media. I do 2 radio programs, one for public radio for Pacifica, that airs in about 10 cities, and also on talk radio, as commercial radio now, I'm in 130 cities. So at any given time, I'm in 140 cities in the United States. Every week, I produce a 3-hour science program. It is the largest nationally syndicated science radio program on national radio. If you want to see a complete list of all 140 stations, go to my website, mkaku.org, and it lists all the different sites. So media is extremely important because I want to say something. First of all, I'm on Twitter. I have 330,000 people on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. I have 2.3 million people on Facebook. So what do I want to say? First of all, in our society, science is invisible. Invisible. You can go day after day watching nonstop television and never encounter a single scientist, never encountered anything related to science, and yet science is the engine of prosperity. Where does wealth come from anyway? I mean, what have we physicists done? We invented the transistor. We invented the laser. We invented television. We invented radio. We invented X-ray machines, microwaves, radar, radio. We invented MRI scans. We created the space program. We created the GPS system. Now let me ask you a question. Can you name a single scientist, a physicist who did any of these things? Okay? But how many people do you know from the Big Bang Theory? How many people do you know from just watching TV? And you begin to realize that there's something not quite right. And so I decided to try to put science on radio. They said initially that science doesn't sell. That's the first thing they told me. You're not going to be able to reach anywhere because we all know science doesn't sell. But then cable television came around, and all of a sudden the Discovery Channel, Science Channel, began to put on science programming. And then they realized, oh my God, there is an audience. There is an audience out there, several million. Not huge, but enough to support several TV stations. So right now I work with the Discovery Channel. I host many of their science specials. I work with the Science Channel, hosted 24 episodes of sci-fi science for the Science Channel, because the audience is not huge, but it's there. And second of all, you can reach people with a message. I believe in social change. I think that society could do better than where it is now. But in order to reach people, you have to have a means, and that's what Pacifica Radio does. Pacifica Radio gives people a platform that want to initiate social change. But I think even talking about pure science is good, because think of what is on the other side of people who don't like pure science. We have the anti-evolutionists. We have the people who don't believe in global warming. We have the people who don't believe in science education in general. They prefer be more comfortable living in the 1800s rather than in the 21st century. And so that's one reason why I do radio. So I'd like to open it up, and maybe you have some questions about how you do radio, what are the prospects, and what do you hope to accomplish? Let's just throw it open.
Well, I wanted to know, actually, what was it that drew you to the medium of radio?
Well, first of all, when you do television, I'm on CBS News in the morning, okay? About every other week, I'm with Charlie Rose, giving the science stories. I'm lucky to get 2.5 minutes, okay? They tell me that. They say, this segment, you got 2.5 minutes with Charlie Rose, okay? And then, you know, when I was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, right? They said, we're going to be very generous. You're going to get 5 minutes. And this is huge, huge, right? And same thing with the Colbert Show. They told me I got 5 minutes, okay? So you realize that everything you know has to be squeezed down to just 2.5 minutes. On radio, you can, well, on BAI, I have an hour show. On Talk Radio Network, I am on 3 hours every week. So it allows you to go in depth. That's one reason why radio, I think, is a much better medium, because you can really engage people. And then with the internet, you can expand it and even get live interaction with an audience. And so I think with radio, you have a chance to really engage the public and go into some detail with the guest. Any other questions?
What kind of feedback do you get, like from people who may have tuned in, you know, because radio, you can just be in your car cruising around and you turn the dial, and all of a sudden, you know, you get feedback from people who never really were into science,
Right.
and then all of a sudden you've converted them, kind of thing.
Right. Well, when I'm on talk radio, it's a call-in show. I can't be there physically, so we record the comment question, then put them on the air. And we have quite a few stations in the South. So we get quite a few people that don't believe in evolution. Quite a few people who believe in God's interpretation of the Bible, which is their point of view. But instead of arguing with them, I simply present another alternative point of view. And so you get a feeling as to what's out there. That in an intellectual community like this at the Cal system, people here are reasonably informed about some of the major scientific issues of the day. But then when you're on talk radio and people, you know, quoting the Bible to you, you realize that they have a different standard. You know, they have a different way of looking at the world. And you have to engage them without getting into a big argument. Unless, of course, you want to get into a big argument on radio. So for me, it was educational, talking to people from very, very diverse communities about their point of view.
How do you approach an educational program versus maybe something more of an academic lecture? Is there a different way, things you use to try to engage with people, in the sense that you have to try to, if you bring the science to the people, is there some sort of techniques or outlook?
That's tough because science tends to fall into jargon, and it tends to fall into minuscule facts and figures that sail right over the audience, okay? So my attitude is, if you cannot talk to your mother about science, then you can't do it on radio. So here's a homework assignment. Talk to your mom tonight, okay? And see whether or not you can get some of these ideas across. Because it's easy to use jargon. It's easy to use catchphrases that you hear in the university. But that's not the way it is outside. You guys live in a bubble, okay? You live in a bubble where everyone thinks very similar to you and are exposed to a lot of ideas. But outside that bubble, the taxpayers out there, the people who pay for your education, the people who make society move, and they have a totally different perspective on things. And so you don't want to preach to the choir. That's what I'm trying to say. On Pacifica Radio, there is a tendency to preach to the choir, because you always assume that the audience thinks just like you. But when you on talk radio, you have to engage all sorts of points of view, and you have to be able to come back. So that's one thing. Second thing, if you do things like radio, like about science or something that's technical, you have to show your enthusiasm. I mean, if you're not interested in it, why should the audience be interested in it? You know, kids figure out, you know, I saw once where some professors were debating, how do you tell a good teacher from a bad teacher? And one professor says, you know, it's so difficult, it's so complex, so many dimensions that you can grade a professor and how you teach. And the other person said, kids do it in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. They got you pegged, okay? They know who's bad, who's good. None of this, oh, it's too complex, it's so difficult, how can you possibly measure this, right? One way is you measure it by enthusiasm. If you don't believe in it, then the audience won't believe in it either, okay? You have to believe what you're saying. It has to come out in what you say. So you have to be enthusiastic about what you're doing. In other words, you have to be engaging, or else the public is simply not going to want to hear. Second of all, you have to know what you're talking about, or at least be open to learning about what you're talking about, okay? So if you come off as a know-it-all, and that also shows in your voice, your tone. You know, you just can't address the audience as a bunch of idiots. You have to engage the audience. And so I think the audience picks it up real fast. I mean, within a matter of seconds, they can pick up whether or not you're enthusiastic, whether you're engaging, whether you're interesting, whether you have something to say, okay? So none of this, you know, is too complex to figure it out. Kids figure it out very fast. Yeah?
How do you manage to encourage the curiosity of a crowd that is so obsessed with the Big Bang Theory and think that physicists look like the characters? How do you engage the crowd? How do you get them interested in what you're talking about?
Well, first of all of us are born scientists, right? We're all born wondering where it all came from. We're all born wondering why the sun shines. We're all born wondering about this until we hit the greatest science killer known to science. And that is junior high school. Guaranteed to kill young budding scientists by the millions. Every poll shows that when you're in 6th, 7th grade, yeah, everyone's interested. Yeah, they want to do this. They want to know about the stars. They want to know about the space program. They want to know about this. Until junior high school comes along, right? And then it's crushed out of them, literally crushed out of them. So what you got to do, if you're going to be on radio, is to rekindle that interest that all kids have. All kids want to know, where did we come from? What does it all mean? Things like that. Except it's crushed out of them. And how is it crushed out of them? Because it becomes memorization. And once you reduce science to a bunch of memorized facts and figures, then you've lost. Let me give you an example. Richard Feynman was the famous Nobel Prize winner in physics, but when he was a child, his father would take him into the forest. And the father would point out birds and explain why birds are shaped the way they are, why they're colored the way they are, why they behave a certain way, everything about the behavior and coloration of birds. Then one day, a bully comes up to young Feynman and says, "Hey Dick, what's the name of that bird over there?" Now in that instant, Feynman knew everything about that bird. Its beak, its shape, its habits, its why it eats, why it flies certain ways, except for one thing, its name. And then the bully said, "What's the matter, Dick? You stupid or something?" And then that instant, Feynman got it. Most people think of science as giving stupid names to birds. That's what science is. That's what junior high school is all about. What is junior high school all about? Giving stupid names to things that you're going to forget anyway. But evolution, adaptation. Why are birds shaped the way they are? These are universal. These are universal truths, independent of the name you give it, right? And so he learned something. And that is, the way people understand science is not science at all. It's taxonomy, giving names to things. And so if you're going to be on radio, you just can't drop a bunch of names, okay? Because these names may not mean anything to people. You have to be able to understand concepts, principles, and explain them to people. Because a simple principle will stay with you forever. Okay? A name will stay with you just for a few minutes. Let me give you an example. Okay? Let me give you an example of something that will stay with you for the rest of your life. And that is, why does it rain? Every kid wants to know. Well, it rains because warm air bumps into cold air, and at the border between them, water vapor condenses, and that's why it rains. Benjamin Franklin figured that out. Okay? Now you'll never forget why it rains. Because I gave you a picture with a concept. I didn't talk about high pressure areas, low pressure areas, and stuff like that. I gave you a picture. And that picture will stay with you for the rest of your life. Every time it rains, you'll know why. Yeah?
You talk about like these very like broad subjects, but then like you were just talking about earlier how you have a very small amount of time to do that. How do you like figure out what needs to be said and what doesn't?
Yeah, you know, we disparage sound bites, right? But it is something that you got to do. You got to be able to take masses of information and crystallize it into a few catchy phrases, a few simple concepts that get the basic idea across, okay? For example, Einstein was once asked, what makes a bad theory, okay? And he said something very interesting. He said bad theories are theories that basically are reduced to bookkeeping, just keeping track of things, right? Real theories, he said, deal with principles, concepts, pictures. That's where real science is done. That's what you have to do. You have to be able to crystallize ideas into simple concepts, pictures, into simple principles that people can understand. That's hard. That's not easy. Now, some of you may have the gift of gab. You know what I'm talking about, right? You put a microphone in front of you and off he goes, right? Well, yeah, that's good, but that only goes so far, right? That only goes so far. After that, people want a little bit of content. They want more than just stream of consciousness gab, right? And that's where your background has to come in. You have to bring something to the table. Yeah.
On television, you can provide pictures for people and show them actual full, broad examples visually.
Right.
But on radio, you don't have that visual element. How do you bridge the gap to provide the same amount of depth that you do on television on radio?
That's real hard. I try to use examples from ordinary life, right? Like in tonight's lecture, I'm going to be talking about the future, the computer revolution, how the mind, how we will interact with technology. And there are these tidal waves of technology that have come along. And what are you going to do about it? My answer is you got to be a surfer. You have to not go against the wave because you'll go bankrupt. You have to ride the wave. Wait for the wave to come, get on board, ride the wave for all it's worth. That's how you deal with technology. That's how you make money. That's how you become successful in high technology. You've got to be a surfer. And so you have to think of analogies, examples that people can relate to. Because like you said, radio, there's no image there. Somebody's just driving his car and listening to you on the radio.
What's the future of radio?
Well, first of all, people thought that radio will gradually become obsolete. But remember that a long time ago we had live theater. And then when radio came along, people said live theater would go kaput. And then when television came along, they said that radio would go kaput. And then when the internet came along, they said that television, radio, and live theater would all go kaput, right? Wrong. We still have Broadway. We still have radio, television. We have a mix. So that's where we're going to be in the future. We're going to have a mix of media. However, the ratio between these medias will change, like newspapers. Newspapers are falling by the wayside, but eventually they'll hit a new equilibrium. So you either have to adapt to the new technology, or you will die. You have to be a surfer. Now with radio, the advantage now is you can engage the public. Okay? When I'm on a book tour years ago, you would speak at a bookstore, and there'd be like 30 bored people in the audience, and you sell a few books, right? Now, if I'm on radio, pushing a book, they tell me exactly how many people listen to this interview. Afterwards, they say 9,430 people listen to your interview because they can track these things now. And so this is revolutionizing the way we engage the public, okay? My last book, which came out, normally I would be doing like a two-week book tour, hitting a city a day. This time it was done through Facebook. I have 2.3 million people on Facebook, and the book hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And it's all due to social media. So radio has to confront social media. Use the best of it, or else it will also go by the wayside. In other words, be a surfer. Adapt or die. Yeah?
Well, one of the most important aspects about radio is its local aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that internet and globalization will affect this aspect of radio, or how will radio adapt to it?
Well, I think radio has to have a dual aspect. On one hand, you do want to talk about what's happening in your local area, but because it is the internet, you reach an audience around the world, okay? On my radio show, people call in from all over the world. They say where they're from, and they're listening on the internet, and they want to, engage. They want to become part of the dialogue. So you can do both. Why limit yourself? In other words, if you have something interesting to say about a local community that generalizes, that has a lesson that other communities can borrow, why not put it out there so other communities can also benefit from it? So don't limit yourself, If you're local, you're local. But lessons can also be done international, and you'd be surprised who listens to you by asking them, where are you? And you might find that many people maybe have left the community, are in Europe or in Asia now, and they still listen because they want to hear what's happening. So don't necessarily box yourself in. Go global if you can. Yeah?
So a lot of large social issues of great concern today have a lot of scientific evidence to back them up, and it's easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's one thing to get people to listen to the scientific evidence behind the issues, but a lot of the times it's hard to take the next step to get them to actually care and take direct action about them. So what do you think the best way to get them to make the connection there is?
You're saying, how do you activate the audience?
Yeah, get them to take.
Well, just remember that some people will never be activated, right? So for the most part, you're there for education, entertainment, enlightenment. And a certain fraction of them will believe in social change. They'll go out with a picket sign, they'll go out with a leaflet, and they'll do something. But you have to have a mix. And in general, most people will not do that because they're busy, but they're sympathetic. They'll donate money. They'll donate maybe some time once in a while. But most people simply don't have the resources by which to take off from work and then hit the barricades, right? So you have a mix in your audience, right? The other thing is you have to get to know who is your audience, okay? At WBAI, we did a poll, and we were absolutely shocked to find that most of our audience was in their 50s and 60s, okay? In other words, you can't maintain a funding base when in 20 years, most of your audience will have passed away. So know your audience, know who listens to you, and then target other audiences if you want to expand from that. Like I said, I'm on CBS television, and CBS polls its viewers. It has the oldest of the three networks. Their listeners are older than the other networks, and they're desperately trying to change that demographic. If you watch, for example, NBC, ABC in the morning, the Today Show, Good Morning America, it's all Hollywood fluff, right? They have high ratings as a consequence. CBS this morning, where I'm on, deliberately keeps it more factual because they have an audience that's more thoughtful. But in terms of raw numbers, it's less. Now, in your situation, get to know your audience. Throw the lines open, get some feedback, find out who's listening to you, and then you'll be able to craft your message a lot better. And don't preach to the choir, okay? Don't assume that everyone thinks the way you do, because in some sense, your job is to convince other people to think like you do. Yeah?
Mr. Akaku, you said that a lot of people have this perception that science is just like essentially taxonomy. We're just naming things. And like junior high school, children tend to lose interest. Do you think our sort of educational system at the lower levels and then escalating to the upper levels has an unnecessary focus on these naming of these different concepts and ideas and things?
Not namings of concepts, just namings of things,
yeah.
like birds and
Yeah.
plants and things. Concepts are good. You're absolutely right. When American students are pitted against other students internationally, we come out near dead last. Among the advanced developed nations, we are second from the bottom, okay, in math and science. We have one of the worst educational systems known to science, okay? So education, well, there are a million reasons why education has to be reformed. Radio can't solve the problem, but you have to deal with the way people are. And that is, people have a very low level understanding of science. Now, in Japan and Asia, the average person, the average listener to television and radio, has a much better understanding of science than an average American. The difference is, though, that Americans are more creative, okay? And they can create things like Apple and Microsoft. In Asia, there's the expression, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. In the West, we have the opposite expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So for the average level of science and technology, Asians do much better than the average American, much better. But they're not creative, because the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So in America, you have that problem, okay? And so you have to deal with it. And you can be part of the solution by trying to raise the level, have thoughtful science programming that is interesting, program that engages the audience. So that's one way to do it. But remember, have no illusions, you're not going to solve the problem. The problem is much deeper in our educational program and even into American culture. Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the next wave of technology or media that we're going to have to run?
Well, technology is basically going in one direction. There is a goal to this. And that is information will be everywhere and nowhere. In other words, it'll be everywhere because there'll be chips everywhere in the environment, floors, ceilings, walls. But it'll be nowhere because you won't see any of it. It'll be invisible. And so we're going to the future is a hyper-connected society where you will live sort of like in the Matrix. For example, the internet, where will the internet be? In your contact lens. So you will blink. I'll show pictures of this tonight. You will blink and you will be online. And infinite information means you talk to somebody, their biography will appear next to their image. If they speak to you in Chinese, it'll translate Chinese into English, and you'll see subtitles. Subtitles of what people are saying in any language right there in your contact lens. So you blink, you'll see blueprints. Blink, you see the final exam. Blink, you'll see all sorts of information because it's all annotated. This is called augmented reality. Now, virtual reality has been getting all the publicity, but people who are serious about this say that the real direction is augmented reality. That is, not you put on glasses and a cartoon appears, you put on contact lens and useful information appears, okay? You don't have to remember, in other words, you're not going to have to remember the periodic chart of the future. You simply blink and there's the periodic chart, okay? A lot of things that you have to memorize today, you will not have to memorize in the future. And for media, you'll be able to access other people very fast by simply blinking. Anyway, that's still 10, 15 years in the future, but that's what's coming.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think we'll see that in our lifetime. But
Oh yeah, that's right. I'll show you prototypes tonight.
Do you think that's necessarily like a good thing, or do you think it'll turn this into like more? Because people have said that the internet turns us into kind of mindless. You know, like our attention spans sort of shrink. Do you think that'll turn us even?
That's always debated. That's always, the internet does not change human nature. It simply magnifies what's already there. We have idiots today, well, we'll have idiots tomorrow. What can I say? It's not surprising at all that you have so many weirdos on the internet ranting and raving about all sorts of stuff, because that's what they do normally. The only difference is you have an international audience now. But after a while, people get tired of it. You know, it's the Wild West on the internet now. Because the internet, as you know, was a military weapon. It was declassified in 1989. But before 1989, it was a classified military weapon. And that's why it's the Wild West, because it's very new. It was unleashed on an unsuspecting world because it was declassified in 1989. That's why there's no yellow pages. That's why there's no directory. That's why there's no censor. It's just a road, because that's the way we want it to fight a nuclear war. To fight a nuclear war, you don't want a censor. You don't want a yellow pages. You want a blank road to rebuild a country after nuclear war. That's why the internet is so strange, because it's a war-fighting weapon. So yeah, when people rant and rave on the internet, that's just human nature. It just magnifies what we already know exists in human nature. Yeah?
Yeah, you said something a few minutes ago about we won't be able to solve the many social problems and ills, not only in the States, but around the world,
right,
because there's something deeper. Are you willing to hazard a guess of what you think that is?
Well, take a look at where wealth comes from, and then how wealth is distributed, right? Ultimately, wealth comes from science and technology. Steam power, electricity, the internet, that creates wealth. But then the question is, how does society distribute that wealth, okay? Does wealth flow to the deserving, the people who worked hard to create that, and the people who desperately need it in order to survive? Or does it go unnecessarily to people who don't need it and basically are not productive, okay? If you take a look at Europe during feudalism, the kings and queens, did they work harder? Were they smarter, wiser? No, they were like foolish like everybody else, except they were kings and queens and hoarded all the wealth, okay? So that's what I'm saying, that when you are on radio, you have to realize that you have a social message as well, because we're going to be talking about, ultimately, wealth. Where does wealth go? Where does it come from? And so you're going to have to be aware that what you say has social consequences. For example, evolution, global warming, even the Big Bang Theory. There's some fundamentalists who disagree with the Big Bang Theory, okay? They believe in the literal interpretation of Genesis. So this has consequences, because if you ban evolution, then kids don't learn evolution and they can't become doctors. They can't become medical researchers, because all medicine is based on evolution, and it has consequences. Or global warming. If you deny it, and then the weather changes, that has consequences on people's jobs, energy production, the wealth of society. So remember that what you say has social consequences. Yeah?
So in this, future hyper-connected society, well, people say that the internet is kind of like the democratization of, media, because everyone can access it and everyone can access all this information. But with corporations like Google and, things like that governing what you get to see as your results, how do you think this hyper-connected, future will be affected by that?
Well, remember, the big corporations will always try to do what big corporations do, and that is get bigger, okay? Mm-hmm. That's what they do. But the public also should do what it has always done, and that is get a voice. And what the internet has done is that it's democratized whole areas of the planet Earth. I grew up in an era called the Cold War. In the Cold War, for 50 years, nothing happened. Nothing happened for 50 years. The world was frozen, solid like ice. And when I was growing up, the term dictator for life meant something. If you were a dictator, you were a dictator for life. The only way they took you out of the office was in a hearse. You died in office, okay? Today, dictators are dictators for how long? 6 months now, okay? Every few months, another dictator goes out the door, right? Now, why is that? Because the internet spreads information. And that's what governments fear. They fear their own people. For example, the movie, The Interview, it's on the internet. I had a chance to watch it over Christmas, and I began to realize that it is a very subversive film, okay? Some films that simply mock the North Korean leadership, they're calling them a bunch of fools and idiots. The government's not fazed by it because, well, it's just mockery. They're just a bunch of idiots up there. But The Interview took it 2 steps more, exposed all the lies and treachery, went into the thinking of the elites that want to preserve nothing but their own power. And you couldn't care less about the people. That is subversive. That's dangerous. And so now I understand why a comedy was so dangerous that it threatened the legitimacy of a whole government. That's what the internet can do. Now, why is that important? Because democracies do not war with other democracies. Think of every war you had to memorize since you were this big. Every war, 1812, 1776, 1066, every single war. They've always been between dictators, kings, queens, emperors, never between two democracies. So as the internet spreads democracies, and democracies do not war with other democracies, it means we're spreading world peace. So we can complain all we want about how, the people want to manipulate the internet, a bunch of idiots on the internet. Yeah. But the internet reflects human behavior. And when human behavior is democratized, we have fewer wars. Because democracies do not war with other democracies. Yeah?
Who are your inspirations in the radio medium as a listener?
Oh, gee, that's a tough one. I'll have to think about that.
Okay.
Yeah?
What's the foundation for the claim that evolutionary theory is at the foundation of medical advance that you passed over that a moment ago, as you were saying?
Oh, if you talk to medical researchers, you realize, first of all, that the Human Genome Project is now at the very foundation of creating new drugs, understanding the way the body is put together, understanding the history of how our bodies mutated with time, how enzymes work together, and what holds the Human Genome Project together is evolution. The tree of life. The Human Genome Project is giving us a tree, a gigantic tree of life, which is, all coming down to one precursor that created not just the human genome, but the primate genome, bacterial genomes. All these genomes give us a tree of life, and it's all based on evolution.
Okay, and is the claim also that prior medical advances before before say the human body could be explored internally were just statistical anomalies and
accidents for the most part, yeah. I saw an autobiography written by one of the doctors who founded the Mayo Clinic. He was a country doctor. He would go from village to village with a little black bag. And he was very honest. In his journal, he said, in my black bag, I have a bunch of nonsense. It's all fake. There's only two things, he said, in my black bag which actually work every single time. The first is a hacksaw. Because if I have to hack off somebody's leg or arm, it works every time. And the second thing which works every time is morphine to deaden the pain of the amputation. Okay? That's it. That's what's called modern medicine in the 1800s. Okay? Now compare that little black bag today to what a modern hospital has. MRI scans, X-ray scans, PET scans, diagnostics coming out of your ears, all coming from modern physics, versus the little black bag that people had in the 1800s. And so medicine back then was folklore, superstition, magic, and nonsense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been talking to other students around campus, and not many of them know about the advances and accomplishments that we've been making in the sciences here on campus. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how those of us who are passionate in the sciences can reach out to them and they explain to them what we're doing and maybe make a few others passionate about the field.
Well, first of all, at Santa Barbara, many of my friends are here, and they work on string theory, and string theory in turn, we think is the theory of everything. It'll explain where the universe, why there was a Big Bang, and what happened before the Big Bang. String theory gives you a whole theory as to what happened before Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. What happened before the Big Bang. And it'll ultimately answer questions like, is time travel possible? You cannot answer that question within Einstein's theory. You need a bigger theory to answer the question of time travel, and that's string theory. Are there other dimensions? String theory says yes, 11 dimensions. Can you go between universes? Well, that's very difficult, but there are wormholes, we think. In fact, if you saw the movie Interstellar, the last scenes of the movie is all string theory. The last scenes when Matthew McConaughey winds up in a 5-dimensional tesseract. And so, right here on campus, you're dealing with people working on the cutting edge of philosophy, theology. Theologians have asked this question, are there other planes of existence? Can we enter parallel universes? Why does time go forward and not backward? All of that we think will come from string theory. And also, of course, you have a large biomedical complex here. And as we mentioned, a lot of that is done genetically. through the genome and through computers. A lot of that's done right here on campus. So your campus is one of the leaders of science and technology. In fact, at New York City, we were one of your rivals. We wanted the ITP to be based in New York City rather than here in Santa Barbara. But the government thought that the beach was more inducive to thinking than Manhattan skyscrapers. So you got the ITP, not us in Manhattan. But you got to tell people, engage them, that science affects who they are, where they're going, jobs of the future, right? In my book, I have a whole chapter on jobs of the future and which jobs are going to be annihilated, just like blacksmiths and wagon makers. Those jobs don't exist anymore. And you'll find out which jobs will exist in the future by buying my book. Okay?
Do you feel that the more accessible information becomes on technology and sort of all this amazing stuff that we've been hearing about just now, the more accessible that becomes, won't it be more difficult to sort of retain a balanced human nature? Because I feel like the internet is sort of throwing us off, and yes, it's exposing our human nature, but maybe to a certain extent that, I don't know, I sort of see WALL-E kind of in the future, almost. Where everyone has a screen in front of them where they can see whatever they want, whenever they want, and you don't have to look right next to you.
Well, one thing the internet does not give you is wisdom. It just gives you lots of noise. Among the noise, there are pearls of wisdom, but you have to be good enough to extract out the pearls of wisdom. Now, when you first get on the internet, it just hits you like this flush of new ideas and concepts and stuff like that. And it's thrilling. Okay, for the first few years, you're hooked by it. But after a while, you get sick and tired of the same old gurus yanting and raving and going off about all sorts of nonsense. You get immune to that stuff. And then after a while, you begin to yearn for voices in the wilderness that have wisdom. Okay? Like in the media, I personally believe that the newspapers are going to shrink even more into the future. People already turn on their internet. There's the news. You don't have to buy the newspaper anymore. But after a while, you want to know, what does it all mean? Who can put it all together? Why are we going in this direction? Why are certain policies good and certain policies bad? And you'll get that through certain wire services that offer wisdom. And so I think that in almost any field, initially you have the flush of curiosity when you first get on the internet. Eventually that wears off. And then eventually you start to look for real wisdom. Things you can use. Things that give you insight into why things are the way they are. It takes a while, but many of you are probably in that stage now where you're just tired of all that ranting and raving. Yeah?
Was there a moment where you had kind of like Richard Kleiner, where you realized that you wanted to devote to outreach of science and to try to explain it to people?
Well, there was one thing. I've served in the United States military. Honorably. I was in the infantry. I graduated from Harvard, and the day after my graduation from Cambridge, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, fondly known as the armpit of the United States Army, and was singing, "I want to go to Vietnam, I want to kill a Charlie Kong," every morning at 6 o'clock. And I was faced with existential questions. Life, death. What am I willing to die for? Questions that the average kid never asks. What are you willing to kill for? Who are you willing to kill? What are you willing to die for? These are questions that I had to ask myself because every week, 500 GIs were dying in Vietnam. Every week. In fact, Life magazine published one issue where it had pictures of 500 GIs that died that week with no commentary whatsoever. No editorial, no explanation, just the pictures of the 500 GIs that died that week in 1968. Okay? So, faced with these questions, I had to ask myself another question. All this knowledge that I had, of what use was this knowledge if I'm going to die in some war? Then what happened was, the war was beginning to die down. I went into the Army. I did basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and Fort Lewis, Washington. And then they found too much sugar in my blood. Totally by accident. They had never examined that before. And all of a sudden, my doctor gave me medical deferment. And all of a sudden, I was free. And all of a sudden, I heard this voice out there saying, I'm going to give you back your life because you were supposed to die in some nameless hill in Vietnam. And I'm going to give you back your life, so do something with it. Okay? Now, I'm a physicist. I don't believe in the supernatural. But I said to myself, holy shit. There's a voice up there saying, I'm not going to have to die. Do something with yourself. So I decided, first of all, to become a physicist, got my PhD and so on and so forth. But then 3 Mile Island happened. And then all of a sudden, people were paralyzed. A nuclear meltdown in Pennsylvania. And the media was scrambling for people who could say anything sensible about nuclear energy. We were all told that nuclear power plants can blow up like a Hiroshima bomb, right? But they weren't told you, oh, by the way, we have class 9 accidents that can also wipe out even more real estate than an atomic bomb. And so all of a sudden, I was on television. I was on radio. And then I had to be able to take all this technical information, all these equations that I knew, and just squeeze it down to run. or whatever path would be best for you if you live right next to the nuclear power plant, okay? And afterwards, then Pacifica Radio came up to me. And Pacifica Radio said, gee, we've never seen somebody like you before. Someone who can speak English and nuclear physics at the same time. And they said, do you want your own radio show? Okay? So that's one thing about Pacifica. Pacifica, as you know, is a little bit raw at times, but it gives a lot of people a break. They take risks. And so they took a risk and gave me my own show. Okay? And so then at that point, all of a sudden, all this knowledge that I knew could be put to use. That is social change. Okay?
That's a good one to end on, and I know you have a very busy evening ahead of you.
Right.
So maybe we can get a station ID from you for KCSB.
Oh, yeah, so what do
Thank
I
you so
say?
much, Dr.
This is Dr. Michio Akaku, and this is KCSB FM, right?
In Santa Barbara.
In Santa Barbara, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
He's got it. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
This is Dr. Michio Akaku, professor of theoretical physics, and I'm on KCSB FM 91.9 in Santa Barbara.
Never gonna not play that one.